All right, what's up, everybody? We're back today with the laws of supply and demand. Now, by now you've watched Mr. Khan's video on both the law of supply and the law of demand, and now I'm going to try and make sense of those two concepts and talk about the laws of supply and demand and how they interact with one another. In Mr. Khan's video, he talked about how price impacts demand and how price impacts supply. And now we are going to talk about how demand impacts supply and supply impacts demand. This is an exciting lesson, in my opinion, because this is one of those things that we learn in school where this legit gives you a better understanding of what it is that goes on in the world and how the world functions, especially from an economic and business standpoint. First thing I want to talk about is markets. In order to truly begin a discussion on the law of supply and demand, you need to understand the different type of markets that we have. Because while we study the laws of supply and demand, I'm sure many of you will be thinking to yourself, well, what about this situation? What about this situation? So we need to cover what the markets are first. And before I even do that, I want to define this term over here. It's a Latin term, ceteris paribus, and it means all else being equal. You may have heard Mr. Khan use this term in his videos, and basically what you would, to use it in a sentence, you would make a statement like, all businesses, ceteris paribus, are going to charge X amount of money, okay? Or all businesses, with everything else being equal, so no exceptions, are going to do this. So when we look at our markets, there are three types of markets that we have. The first is called a competitive market. Now, in a competitive market, let me switch my colors quick. In a competitive market, there are two characteristics. First of all, we have many firms. Now, in economic terms, a firm is just some kind of entity that creates a good or service. You might call it a business. There are many businesses or many firms involved. That's the first characteristic. And the second characteristic is that there are many resources. So essentially what I mean by many resources is to say that the products are similar. It's not a rare product. So the product is not rare. So there are many people producing, and the product they are producing is generally the same thing. Then we have a non-competitive market, one in which one of these two is not in place. So either there are few firms or the product is rare. So just to give you some example, oil might be an example. There aren't overseas, there are not that many oil companies making oil or drilling for oil. Airplane manufacturers, that's another example of where there are not that many firms. Even computers nowadays are getting to be a non-competitive market with the rise of Microsoft and the rise of Apple to the top of that industry. Then we have, products not rare. I'm looking at things like artwork. So with artwork, obviously, if you have a fancy piece of art, you're not going to have, say, 5,000 copies of some famous Jackson Pollock painting floating around. So the market for that is a non-competitive market. And then lastly, we have a monopolistic market. A monopolistic market, which you may understand already, is one in which we have only one firm. and they control that industry completely. There aren't too many examples of monopolies nowadays, mainly because monopolies today are illegal. The closest I can think of is We Energies here in Wisconsin, Wisconsin Energies. If you do not live in an area where that city has their own utilities company, you are forced to take We Energies. You don't have a choice. They're the only company that will supply to you. So that's probably the closest we have today. All right, now we want to talk a little bit about equilibrium price. Now, hopefully, this demand and supply curve chart that I have copied for you makes a little bit of sense after watching your videos. And now I want to talk about market price. So market price is simply going to be the price that is charged to consumers. And one of the most basic rules of economics is that the market price always wants to be at equilibrium with the supply curve and the demand curve. Now, maybe this is a good time to stop and take a step back and say, these concepts are going to be somewhat confusing for you at first. My suggestion is that you pause the video from time to time, take quite a few notes, and if you have questions, stop the video from time to time and ask me. Okay, so in terms of the market price for this demand curve, what you see here is this dot. The equilibrium price is the point at which the supply curve comes in line with the demand curve. So whatever this price is right here, that would be the market price. That is how much the consumer will get charged. You know, oftentimes uninformed consumers believe that individual markets or individual companies will charge more than they should be charging or charge less than they could be charging. And what people don't realize that in a competitive market, one in which there are many firms and one in which the product is not rare, those businesses don't really have that much control over their market price. It's relatively the same as everyone else, and it always centers around this point where the demand meets the supply. At this time, this is a good spot to introduce to you then our basic laws of supply and demand. And there's 4 of them, 4 rules. So the first one, if demand increases and supply remains unchanged, then it leads to a higher equilibrium price and higher quantity. So if demand goes up and supply stays the same, the quantity and the price will go up. If the demand decreases and the supply remains unchanged, then the opposite will happen. The quantity and the price will go down. On the other hand, if supply increases and demand remains the same, then it leads to a lower price and a higher quantity. And then lastly, if supply decreases but demand remains unchanged, it leads to a lower quantity sold at a higher price. Okay? Now, all that might lead your head to swim a little bit right now, but we're going to make some perfect sense out of this right now, looking at our demand and supply curves. All right, let's take a look at a term deemed excess demand, and this will help us a little bit with our first couple rules. We'll come on here. Now, hopefully by this point, all of you understand that if this were the demand and supply curve, with this being the demand, this being supply, if this were the demand and supply curves for an industry, for lack of a better example, let's say this is hamburgers. This is the hamburger market. Let's put some labels here. Let's say this is $1, $2, $3, $4, and $5. And let's say this is 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, and 80,000. Now, if we look at our supply and demand curve, what we're going to see is that we have an equilibrium price right now. We have an equilibrium at this point right here, which if we draw our lines, we will see that that brings us to an equilibrium price of $3 and an equilibrium quantity of $40,000. So that's where we're at, as long as everything stays in balance. All right, sorry for the little delay. Had to change location, so we're back to it. So $3 under this market is the equilibrium price, and at that price, the market will produce $40,000. However, let's say some big athlete decides they're going to endorse hamburgers, and they start a national campaign, and they want everybody to eat more hamburgers. And so because of that, everybody decides they want more hamburgers. And what happens is the quantity demanded increases. And when the quantity demanded increases, this whole curve is going to shift to the right. Okay? Or you can think of it along the quantity axis, it's going to increase. So it's going to move further to the right. Now let's reevaluate. Under this market, if we stay at the price of $3, what we have here is a situation where the quantity supplied is 40,000 hamburgers. However, the quantity demanded at $3 is about 57,000 hamburgers. So what we end up here is with all this excess demand. Okay, so there are 17,000 hamburgers demanded that are not being supplied. Now, you also know, because we just went over it, that in every market, if it's a competitive market, ceteris paribus, the market price is going to be equal. Okay? The market price is going to be the equilibrium price between the supply curve and the demand curve. So if we look at this here, the market, if this demand curve shifted to the right, okay, so if demand increased and supply stayed the same, we said, well, let's look at what we have here. What we have here then is a situation where the market will adjust because it always wants to be at equilibrium. It will go up to $4, and at $4, it'll produce about 48,000. So both the quantity and the price went up. Okay, so let's see if that falls in line. So if demand goes up, supply stays the same, quantity and price will go up. Okay, so you see that here represented in a visual function. So if we have this excess demand, there's going to be a change in the price because it wants to adjust to get back to equilibrium. Okay, so the price adjusts to $4, and at $4, the demand increases. All right, let's erase that, or actually, rather, let's move on to excess supply. So you can see then, well, you'll see it in the next one. All right, so excess supply, same concept, where there's some kind of change in the market that results in there being a larger supply than demand. So let's say once again, this is the hamburger market. Hamburger market. We got $1, $2, 3, 4, and 5. We got 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60, 70, 70, and 80. All right, so right now, same concept. We can see that our equilibrium price is right here, and at that equilibrium price, we would have a price of $3, and we would produce, that market would produce 40,000 hamburgers. And it'd be perfect because at that price, everybody who wants a hamburger, who's demanding a hamburger, will get one. However, let's say, for instance, somebody decides they're going to design a machine that can make hamburgers faster and more efficiently than a human. Okay? And that will decrease the cost. So when technology increases production, what happens is it increases the ability of the market to produce. See. All right, my computer just died, so I apologize for the gap there, but we're back now, so we should be all good. All right, so back to where we were. In this market, in this supply and demand curve, the market equilibrium price and quantity will be 40,000 at $3. However, as I mentioned, let's say a technology comes along and changes the industry, changes the way the industry functions, and at a given price, a business can produce more. If that turns out to be the case, then the same way we saw the demand curve move to the right to show an increase in quantity, we're going to see the same thing with the supply curve here. We're going to see the supply curve shift to show an increase in quantity. Now, the market price was $3. However, at $3, the supply will be 53,000. Okay, so industries will supply 53,000 hamburgers, but only 40,000 are demanded. And we have this big area in here that represents excess supply. So that means that there is too much supply. Now, because of that, the market will take corrective measures to fix itself. Now, you know that the market always wants to be in equilibrium. So if any time the demand and supply curves are not in equilibrium, it'll move to adjust to the market. Okay, so we see that our new equilibrium is right about here. We draw our lines. And we see that now the price will be about $2.60. And at $2.60, the market will produce about 47,000 hamburgers. Okay, and everyone will be happy. Now I want to talk a little bit about what the actual impact is for a business who has to deal with the supply and demand curves. Okay, let's say, so we have our business matrix. Let's say that this is the business matrix for Jake's Pasty Company. Jake makes pasties. He lives in Germany, so they have a lot of pasties. So unfortunately, it's not a rare product, and he is in a competitive market. So if we look at this, Jake can make a quantity of 50 pasties, and if he makes a quantity of 50 pasties, his variable cost will be 300, and that'll mean his total cost will be 400. Now, let's say that the market price is $8. Let's say that the market price is $8. At $8, Jake will bring in a revenue of $400 and a profit of 0, which is fine. That's fine. Everything matches out. Everybody gets paid, and he doesn't lose money, and he doesn't have any extra money. However, let's say that the market changes and the new market price is now, let's say, let me erase that quick. All right. However, let's say that Jake's variable costs go up, okay, and Jake can no longer strike that, reverse it. Let's say that the market price goes down to $7.50. If the market price is $7.50, how much will Jake bring in? Well, we can bring up our calculator. 7.5 times 50. Jake will bring in a revenue of $375, and he will have a profit of negative $25. If Jake is bringing a profit of negative $25, he is in trouble. Okay, he is in trouble. Now, if Jake's business is in trouble, this is where oftentimes consumers think, well, this is a really easy fix. Okay, Jake could maybe charge less than $7.50. However, let's take a look at that. If Jake charges $7, say, and he still only makes 50, Jake's profit is going to be, or his revenue is going to be $350, and his profit's going to be negative 50. So his profit actually goes down. Now you might say to yourself, yes, but Mr. Van Hepperen, if he's charging $7, he's going to have to make more than 50, which is great. Let's say he makes 60. All right, which is cool. Now he can make 60. The only problem with that is that his variable cost is based on a quantity output of 50. If he goes up to 60, let's just say for sake of argument, his variable cost then will go up to $350. Okay, so it's not that easy. It's not as easy as just saying, well, they can produce more or they can charge less. Now, I've also heard people say, I've also heard people say, well, why can't they just charge more? Okay, they might bring in less, but what if they charged more? So let's keep the prices the same, and now let's charge $8. Okay, we've already established that at $8, it's selling 50. Jake would bring in a profit of, or revenue of 400, and that would be enough to zero him out for the month. However, if the rest of the pasty market is selling pasties for $7.50 and Jake is selling them for $8, Jake is not going to be in business very long, because the chances that Jake can sell this 50 when he's charging 50 cents more than everyone is going to be difficult. So as you can see, it is not as easy as many people think to just be able to adjust your prices a little bit away from market price. For the most part, ceteris paribus, all businesses will charge within a couple cents or a couple dollars, depending on how expensive those products are, the market price. So pretty much everybody follows the market price. All right, so now that you understand how market price is established and you understand how market price influences businesses, let's take a look at the different factors that are going to go in to price. Now, factors that go into supply. We have transportation costs. For instance, you own a business. In order to get the product that your business makes to the consumer, you have to have a fleet of trucks that will bring your product to the consumer. Okay? By having that fleet of trucks, you have to pay for gas and you have to pay for maintenance. If the price of gas goes up, that means the price to supply the product to the consumer will go up. And if the price to the consumer goes up, your supply curve will move to the left, because the quantity produced at a given price will go down, and we'll have an excess demand, and you can figure out what's going to happen then. Taxes can change from year to year, and depending on what happens with taxes, that might increase or decrease the amount of money that a business has to pay to supply a certain number, and can shift the supply curve one way or the other. There are food-specific factors like weather, or the cost of feed if you need animals to keep healthy for slaughter or things of that nature. So if you produce food, there are a whole nother gamut of factors that go into it. Technology. As I mentioned earlier, if an industry comes out and all of a sudden they have technology that increases production at a cheaper cost, their supply curve is going to go up and it's going to shift to the right. Now, there are also factors that can impact demand, and you may be asking yourself, I thought you were going to tell us all the factors that go into price. But keep in mind, any shift in either one of these supply or demand curves is going to change price. So any change in supply or demand does lead to a change in price. Public need. Okay, during a recession, there are certain things that people don't do. They don't go out to movies as much. They don't do landscaping on their houses as much. They settle more on the basics. Okay, so public need will dictate it. And then also new technology. All right, so let's take a look at some examples of how this impacts you in your life. Let's look at oil. Okay, many people complain about gas and how gas is impacted, but impacts our society, and a lot of people have it in their heads that, well, the oil companies really just try to screw us as much as they can, and they drive up prices whenever they want to, and actually that's not true. Overseas, anytime something happens that makes it harder for oil companies to produce oil, the cost to produce goes up for the employer, or for the company. If the cost goes up, their supply curve will shift to the left. Well, actually, let's start right here. Let me draw this out for you. So let's say this is the oil industry, okay? And let's say, this is our $3 mark. And at $3, the industry will produce about 43,000 gallons or barrels of oil, okay? There's a bombing in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden it becomes harder to get the trucks with the oil through that area. They can't get as many trucks through. Therefore, at a given price, they cannot produce as much. So that shifts our supply curve to the left. So now, if we keep the price at $3, we would be here on the supply curve, here on the demand curve, and what we have here is an excess demand. When we have an excess demand, or when supply goes down and demand remains unchanged, that means we have a new equilibrium price and quantity, and now we have less oil supplied, and the price of oil would have to go up. So if it's harder for the oil companies to get the oil to the consumer, you can see how, using the supply and demand curve, the price would go up. All right, so that's changes in the supply curve, but let's take a look at how things would change on the demand curve. All right, let's take Xbox for example. So now we covered the supply. Let's look at new technology. So that's where we're looking. That's where I'm going to look now, down here, to show how that impacts price. So Sony had Xbox for a long time, and that worked out pretty well for them. And let's say, for sake of argument, that Xbox at its peak cost $300 as an equilibrium price, and at that equilibrium price, they could produce and sell 43,000 units a year, 43,000 Xbox. Okay? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it is, bam, Xbox 360 comes out. It's new technology. Okay? New technology leads to a huge decrease in quantity demanded of the Xbox. Okay, so now at $300, the supply stays at 43,000, but the quantity demanded plummets to about 21,000. All right, as you see and hopefully can identify already, we have huge excess supply. And in this case, with the excess supply, the market will change itself so that there is a new equilibrium price and equilibrium demand, or quantity demanded. And it'll change, and the price in this market of the Xbox will plummet to about $209, and at $209, they'll sell about 33,000 units a year. Okay, so you can see how the shifts in the market will change the price, and it will essentially change the amount that is demanded in that market. All right, so threw a lot of things at you. Hopefully, you're able to comprehend most of them. So let's do a very, very quick review. So market price always wants to be at equilibrium with the supply and demand curve. So market price always wants to be at equilibrium with supply curve and demand curve. Okay. Secondly, the abilities of firms to supply at a price can change, which will lead to a change in market price. So any change in supply the price to supply will change market price. Market price being the price to the consumer. And then lastly, public taste and need can change quantity demanded and then price. All right. So hopefully now you have a greater understanding of how our market works and how businesses develop a business plan for how much they're going to charge for their product and how much they're going to make, how many of a given product they will make. And now we can take this conversation and take a look deeper into the production of our renewable energy sources and kind of get a better understanding of maybe why certain sources are expensive, are more expensive than others, and why some of our resources are not produced in a higher quantity. All right, so until then, like I said, hopefully you took good notes. Hopefully you paused the video at certain times. Please, please, please ask me for help if you need help. I'm here for you. I can run through things over with you again. But until then, until our discussion on Thursday, good luck.